Hey everyone, welcome back. Ready for another deep dive? Today we're going to be exploring some seriously cool music and how it's being used to challenge norms and express identity.
Sounds fascinating.
It really is. We're specifically focusing on intersex and transgender artists and how they're using their art to make their voices heard.
It's such a powerful topic. Music as a form of empowerment and self-discovery.
Exactly. And our guide for this deep dive is an article from TATANKA called Intersex and Transgender Musical Artists, Artistic Expression and Identity, Gender Identity and Musical Style.
I've heard of TATANKA. They do some really insightful work on gender and identity.
They do, and this article really digs into how these artists are reshaping the music industry, breaking down those genre barriers, building these inclusive communities. It's pretty amazing.
It's like they're rewriting the rules of the game.
Right. And one of the things that the article really highlights is how music becomes this way for many of these artists to communicate their lived experiences. It goes way beyond those typical conversations we hear about gender.
It's about grappling with the complexities of identity in a really personal and raw way.
Yeah, and sometimes it's about addressing those really personal experiences with marginalization, too.
And it's fascinating how this connection between music and identity plays out in different ways for different artists. Some, like Laura Jane Grace, use their music to directly challenge those societal norms.
Oh, I love her work.
Me too. While others might focus more on creating spaces for exploration and understanding.
So there's this whole spectrum of expression, but that common thread seems to be that drive to use music to speak their truth.
Absolutely. And speaking of Laura Jane Grace, her album, Transgender Dysphoria Blues, is such a powerful example of using lyrics to reclaim those narratives and reflect on personal journeys.
That album really resonated with me. The raw honesty of her lyrics, documenting her transition and struggles with identity. It's just incredible.
And it's not just the lyrics. Think about performance itself. It becomes this platform for exploration.
Oh, totally.
The way artists use their stage presence, their fashion, their movement, it's all part of breaking free from those traditional constricting notions of gender.
It's like every aspect of their art becomes a way to explore and express their identity.
And that's what makes it so impactful, I think, both for the artists themselves and for the audience experiencing it. It creates this incredible feedback loop of self-discovery and shared understanding.
And that leads us to another point the article makes, how these artists are really shattering those genre boxes we often try to put music in.
Oh yeah, those ingrained expectations we have about, like, rock being masculine, pop being feminine, and so on.
Yeah, like we just assume certain genres belong to certain genders. But intersex and transgender artists are completely turning all of that upside down.
They're blending genres in ways that are just mind-blowing, refusing to be defined by those narrow categories, and honestly, they're creating something completely fresh and exciting in the process.
Like 𝗓𝗕, for instance, blending pop sensibilities with elements of country and industrial music. It's incredible.
I love 𝗓𝗕, such a unique sound.
And it's not just about individual artists, it's about impacting the industry as a whole. By breaking these genre norms, they're forcing the entire system to become more inclusive.
To recognize that huge well of talent that exists beyond those tired old categories.
Makes you wonder how much incredible music we've missed out on because of these limiting definitions.
It's really inspiring to see artists reclaim their power and forge their own paths.
For sure. It's like they're saying, look, these genres are tools, and we're going to use them in ways you never even imagined.
Exactly. And speaking of pushing boundaries, the article dives into a couple really interesting artists. Anani, for example, blends electronic music with these sweeping orchestral elements. It's breathtaking.
I've heard some of Anani's work. So hauntingly beautiful.
And then there's 𝗧𝗓 Diamond, who uses the power of soul and blues to share her perspective as a Black trans woman. Her voice is phenomenal.
And she uses it to tackle some really important social issues.
What I find so exciting about both Anani and 𝗧𝗓 Diamond is that they're building on these established genres, but also transcending them at the same time.
It's like paying homage to the roots of these musical traditions while pushing them forward in bold new directions.
It's so cool to see. But, the article doesn't shy away from the fact that these artists often face a ton of challenges in the industry.
Sadly, yeah. It's not all sunshine and roses.
There's a lot of discrimination, a lack of representation, and this constant pressure to conform to those binary norms that we keep talking about.
It's like they're constantly having to fight for their space, their voice.
And the article highlights some specific barriers, things like getting their music played on the radio, being booked for major festivals, even just getting signed to a label.
It can be a real uphill battle.
It's frustrating to think about how much talent is overlooked or stifled just because it doesn't fit into those predefined boxes.
Yeah. And it's a systemic issue that needs to change.
It does.
Mm.
We need to dismantle those systems and amplify these marginalized voices if we want to see a truly inclusive and representative music industry.
Couldn't agree more. But even amidst all these challenges, there are some really inspiring developments happening too.
There are.
Like the rise of these inclusive music scenes and platforms like Bandcamp.
Bandcamp is a game changer.
Right. It's like a whole counter movement is building, giving these artists these safer spaces to create and connect without that pressure to conform.
It's like when the mainstream industry falls short, people create their own spaces where creativity and authenticity are valued. And that's powerful.
It's like building a parallel music universe where the rules are different and the possibilities are endless.
I love that, a parallel music universe. And Bandcamp is crucial because it offers artists a way to reach their audiences directly without having to go through all those traditional gatekeepers who might not get it.
It's a way to bypass those restrictive systems and connect with fans on a much deeper level. And speaking of powerful connections, the article takes us even deeper into this idea of music as a tool for self-discovery through the story of Alex, a transgender musician who used her music to come out to the world.
Oh, wow, her story sounds incredible. What a powerful way to share her truth with the world.
It really is, and we'll dive into all those details right after this quick break. Welcome back, everyone. So before the break, we were just getting into Alex's story, this transgender musician who used her music to come out to the world.
It's such a powerful example of music as a tool for self-discovery and challenging norms.
Right. Like her story really highlights those themes we were discussing earlier about self-expression, breaking free from those expectations, and finding your voice.
Absolutely. It's about using music to carve out your own space in the world.
Exactly. So the article talks about how Alex had this deep connection with grunge music growing up.
Oh, interesting. Grunge, huh? I wouldn't necessarily think of that as a genre that's traditionally associated with, transgender identity.
Yeah, it's often seen as this very masculine, kind of aggressive genre, but for Alex, it was an escape, this raw, emotional outlet.
I can see that. The intensity of the music, the angst.
But at the same time, it created this sense of dissonance for her, because it didn't quite align with who she felt she was inside.
That feeling of being drawn to something you love, but also feeling like it doesn't fully represent you.
Exactly. And that tension, that internal struggle, is what ultimately led her to write Unveiled.
The song that became her way of coming out as transgender.
Yeah. And the lyrics are so powerful. They trace her journey from that feeling of confusion, of not fitting in, to that moment of self-discovery, and finally feeling like she could be herself.
So the song itself becomes this act of unveiling, both for Alex and for the listener.
Right. Like each verse, each note peels back another layer and reveals more of her truth.
The article describes her performance of Unveiled, too, and I can only imagine the emotion in that room.
I know, right? Like, here she is on stage sharing these incredibly personal lyrics with an audience who, for the most part, doesn't know what's about to unfold.
It must have been terrifying and exhilarating at the same time.
For sure. To stand up there and be so vulnerable, to declare your truth through music.
And for the audience, it becomes this powerful moment of witnessing someone step into their authentic self.
And the response was incredible. Unveiled really resonated, especially within the LGBTQ+ community. It became this anthem, a symbol of hope and self-acceptance.
It's like proof that our stories have power.
That when we share our experiences, we can create these ripples that reach far beyond ourselves.
It's about visibility, representation, letting others know that they're not alone.
Absolutely. And what's interesting is that after coming out, Alex's musical style started to shift too.
Oh, really? How so?
Well, she started moving away from that heavier grunge sound and began incorporating more electronic elements, experimenting with different vocal techniques.
So her music evolved alongside her personal growth.
Exactly. It's like she found this newfound freedom to experiment and create without those limitations or expectations she might have felt before.
It makes you wonder how much of our creative expression is shaped by those societal norms, those unspoken rules.
And when we break free from those, what incredible possibilities open up.
That's a powerful thought, and it speaks to a larger truth about identity and art. As we grow and change, our art naturally reflects those shifts.
It becomes a mirror, a reflection of our inner world.
I love that. And stories like Alex's remind us that it's okay to evolve, to explore different facets of ourselves, both personally and creatively.
To embrace those changes and allow our art to grow alongside us.
Beautifully said. And it brings us back to that important question we touched on earlier. What would it take to create a truly inclusive music industry where artists like Alex can thrive and where those diverse voices can reach the widest possible audience.
Yeah, it really makes you think, about how much potential is out there just waiting to be unleashed.
Seriously. And thinking about everything we've discussed today, I mean, one of the biggest takeaways for me is just how these artists are using their music to spark these broader conversations about identity, about representation, about breaking down those
Like,
barriers.
it's so much more than just entertainment. It's a catalyst for social change.
Right. And we see it in everything from the way they're blending genres to those incredible communities they're building both online and in real life.
Those spaces where they can truly be themselves without those pressures and expectations.
It's like they're creating a whole new blueprint for what the music industry could and should be.
A blueprint that values authenticity, diversity, and those unique voices that have been marginalized for far too long. And I think what struck me most about Alex's story was how her musical evolution mirrored her personal journey.
Yeah, that shift from grunge to a more electronic, experimental sound, it's fascinating.
It's like you can hear her growth and self-discovery reflected in the music.
It's like a sonic representation of breaking free from those limitations and embracing those new possibilities.
And it reminds me of how my own musical taste has evolved over the years as I've grown and learned and experienced new things.
It's like a soundtrack to your life, constantly changing and evolving.
Exactly. And I think Alex's story also underscores the importance of sharing those personal narratives, even when they're difficult or make people uncomfortable.
Because when we share our stories, we give others permission to do the same.
We create this space for connection and understanding.
And ultimately, I think that's what it's all about, right?
Yeah.
Building empathy and creating a world where everyone feels seen and heard.
Yeah. Couldn't have said it better myself. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with this question. How can we, as listeners, as consumers of music, actively support and amplify those voices, especially those of intersex and transgender artists?
It's a question worth pondering. It's not just about passively listening. It's about making conscious choices about the music we consume, the artists we support, the platforms we use.
It's about using our voices and our actions to advocate for a more inclusive and equitable music landscape.
So think about how you can be a part of that change. Support independent artists. Seek out diverse voices. Challenge those norms and expectations that limit creativity and expression.
And most importantly, keep those ears open and those minds curious. You never know what incredible music and stories are out there just waiting to be discovered.
Beautifully said. This conversation has been so insightful. It's really given me a lot to think about.
Me too. And I hope it sparks some new ideas and inspiration for everyone listening. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and we'll catch you next time for another exploration into the world of music and culture.